Is it a palindrome? Welcome to the Palindrome Simulator. Now, this is a popular interview question and also a popular C-sharp coding challenge as well. So what we basically do is enter a number like 12321 and hit enter, and then it will tell us if the number is a palindrome. Now, this can work with letters, words, and also numbers, for example. So a palindrome is basically a word phrase or sequence of numbers that reads the same backwards as it does forwards. So 12321 is a palindrome because it reads the same whichever way you look at it. However, 12345 is not a palindrome. So you can see it says number is a palindrome, no. So how do we tackle a problem like this? Well, give it a go yourself, and if you can't do it, or if you can do it, then check out the rest of the video for a solution. Like all my coding challenges, it does require you have some knowledge on C#. If you're unfamiliar with the C# language, you can check out my full course on C# for absolute beginners. It's linked in my profile. So let's take a look at what we have so far. So not much is going on. We have our welcome message. We have a never-ending while loop that keeps asking us for a number. We take the number and convert it to an integer. And then we pass in the integer into this method here, which is called isPalindrome. So right now the method's doing absolutely nothing. That's what we need to do now. And then the result is returned out and output to the user. And then the while loop continues. So what we need to do is fill out some information into this method and actually make it work. So how do we approach this problem? Now, like most coding challenges, there's lots of different ways of achieving the same goal. What you want to do is make something that solves the problem. It runs relatively fast, but not only that, it's maintainable by yourself in the future or also anybody else. It needs to be readable as well. So there's a fine line of where our solution should sit. So we can solve this mathematically with lots of math and various things, but we're programmers, we don't know math, or at least some of us don't. So let's think outside the box a little here. How can we actually do this? Well, what if I told you that let's ignore the requirement for a number? So we're not looking for a palindrome number like 12321. How about if I said your application should work with strings as well, like madame, for example? And then you start thinking to yourself, okay, well, it has to work with numbers and strings, so maybe everything can be a string. Maybe we don't even need to convert it to an integer, for example. Then maybe we can, take each character in turn and just reverse it and then, compare that reversal to the original string. Because when this problem comes about, when you see it for the first time, you get a bit lost in the numbers. You think, oh, maybe there's some math equation I'm missing or don't understand. But if you just forget all the math and just deal with the string itself, then it brings it back down to sort of our programmer territory where we've been working with strings, characters, and loops and things like that. We don't have to worry about the math as much. So what we're going to do, the very first thing, we're going to convert this integer in our method here to a string, and then we're going to try and reverse it. So what do we do? How do we set that up? So for a start, nothing's really happening in here. Let's set up a new variable, and this will be our kind of result that we return out. We're just going to initialize that to false, and then eventually we return it at the end. So the first thing we want to do is convert this number to a string. So I'm going to declare a new string variable here. I'm going to call it input because it's the user's input. And then what I want to do is convert this integer, which the user is giving us, into a string. So I can do that in various ways. I can use the convert static class here. I can say toString, and then I can convert the number. No problem at all. But a more common way and easier way of doing this is to just take the number and use the toString method. It does exactly the same thing. It's just a little bit shorter and easier to write. Next, I want to declare another variable, and I'm going to call this reverse or reversal. It doesn't really matter. And I don't really know what I'm putting in there yet because we need to reverse the input. So now we've declared two variables and we've initialized input, which is just converting this to a string. Now, how do we reverse the input? How do we take each character or each number in turn and flip it? How do we reverse that? Well, we can use something like a for loop in order to do that. So we'll just declare a new variable inside the for loop here called x. It doesn't really matter what it's called. And x is just going to keep going until it reaches how many characters or numbers we have in our input string. So we'll just say input.length, which is a property, and that'll get the number of characters in the input. And then for every iteration, we're just going to increment by 1. So if the user enters, for example, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, then the length will be 5, and this loop is going to do 5 iterations. No problem at all. Now, how do we reverse this string? So what we could do is say reverse. Right now it has no content at all. Oh, look at Visual Studio has kindly done this for us, but it's almost correct. So what I want to do here, I want to take each character in turn from the input. So what we can do here, there is a method called substring here. If I just open that up. So what I want to do, I want to take each character in turn. So it'll have a length of 1 every time. So if the user enters, like I say, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, then I only want to take 1 character at a time. So the start index here of the substring method will be x, because that's the current iteration of the loop. And then I always want to take 1 character. And now this isn't quite going to work, because every time this iterates, reverse will take the value of itself and then add this on the end. We don't want that. We want to take the character and then whatever's in reverse. So that should actually build it up in reverse. So if you don't quite understand that, let's run it. Let's take a look. We can debug it and, step through it, and then we can understand how this works a little better. So I'm going to run the application now. I'm just going to enter 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, hit enter. So right now, reverse is nothing. The input is 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. So if we go through here, so right now, x is equal to 0. So we're going to take the first character using the substring method of input, and we want to take the very first character, which is indexed at 0, and we only want to take 1 character. And that will give us, if we come down to the immediate window, so that's the number 1, because that's the very first number in our input. So we're just extracting the 1 here. And then we're adding this to the value which is already in reverse, which is nothing because it's our first iteration of the loop. Reverse doesn't have any value. So if I step over this, so you can see reverse now has a value of 1. So on our next iteration, x is equal to 1, we're getting the next character from input, and then we're appending reverse's current value onto the end of that. So if I step over that, you can see reverse now equals 2, 1, because we're adding it in reverse. So if we keep stepping over this 3, 4, 5 times, you can see reverse is now 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. So it looks like a palindrome. So now what we need to do is actually set the flag to say, okay, if it's the same, if the input is the same as reverse, then we know we have a palindrome. So what we can do, for example, is say, okay, is input equal to reverse? If it's equal to reverse, we can just say, okay, it's a palindrome. So set our result as true and just return it out of there. Okay, so let's try and run this now, see if it works. See if we've solved the problem. So 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. Is it a palindrome? Yes, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, it's not. So it looks like we've solved the problem. Let's try and trick it. 1, 2, 3, 1. Okay, 1, 2, 1. Okay, how about negative 1, 2, 1? Okay, so it looks like it works. Looks like it works. So when we convert it to a string, we're also dealing with negative numbers as well. So it looks like we're doing it for numbers, no problem at all. So when you look at coding challenges, this is like what you should be thinking in your head. Okay, we know we need a loop, we know we need to check something, and we need to solve the underlying problem. How we've done that, we haven't used the math route. We've actually just converted it to a string, reversed it, and then we're just checking the result. That's one solution on how to solve it. It doesn't have to be the answer, it's just one solution. But how can we improve this? Like, can we tidy this up a bit? Well, yeah, we could use a for each loop, for example. So check this out. Look, we can use a for each loop here, and we can say for each character in the input, then append reverse in pretty much how we're doing it before. So this is exactly the same as our previous example with the for loop. It's just a lot more elegant, and it's kind of easier to read as well. So every iteration of here is taking the first character, then the second character, then the third, and just appending it to reverse, exactly how we were doing before. So if I do one, for example, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, then I get yes and no. So it works exactly the same way. So it's a lot more tidier here. And if we want to tidy this up even more, we could just say, for example, this. So we just return the result of this condition here. So you can see it's a lot more tidy, but when you actually code these and think about it, it's more easy to kind of write it out and then, you know, condense it afterwards. So this does exactly the same as we did before. So is there another way of tackling this problem? So let me show you one more thing here. So what I'm going to do, because we're taking in a string from the user, we're converting it to an integer, then we're just pretty much converting it back into a string. It seems a little silly. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to store this into a string, and I'm going to call it input. And then I'm going to pass the string into the method itself. So I'm going to put input in here, and put a string as the parameter here. And then we're going to work with the string directly, so we don't need this here. And what we can do, which is pretty funny, we can delete all of this and we can utilize what's called the link namespace. This is an inbuilt namespace in Visual Studio, and it has a host of different functionality features, and it's pretty much like when you query a database, but you can do it programmatically. So what you can say here is say input, which is the string that's coming in. And then there's a method here called sequence equal. Now this takes in a couple of different overloads here. But what we want to do, we just want to say, is the input sequence, well, it's a sequence of characters because that's what a string is this equal to input dot reverse? So the reverse method will get these characters. So a sequence of characters is a string. And the reverse of the string will put all those characters in reverse order and return the result. And then we're feeding this result directly into this sequence equal method, which will tell us if the input is equal to the reverse of the input. So now that does exactly the same thing as before, and I'll prove it to you. Let's take a look. Enter a number. 2, 1. Is it a palindrome? Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, it's not. Okay, negative 12. Okay, how about negative a palindrome? No. Okay, a palindrome. Yes. So it looks like it works. It's fantastic. Now let's try a string, because we're not using integers anymore. So is it a palindrome? Yes, it is, which is perfect. So that's pretty good, isn't it? Okay, how about case sensitivity? Is it a palindrome? Yes. So, okay, how about this? Okay, you see, so there's a problem with the casing, but otherwise all the numbers work, the strings work, it's no problem at all. So that's pretty good, isn't it? So how do we fix the casing issue? What we could do is just convert the string to a lower, and we can do this in both places. So now we're always converting the string to lowercase every time. So if I run the program now, that should solve the problem. And yes, it is a palindrome. So it looks like it works now, and that is the palindrome problem, the palindrome coding challenge. So you can see there's numerous solutions. We didn't do the mathematical approach, we did the kind of programmatic, logical thinking outside of the box way, and we came up with a couple of different solutions. But you can see how knowing about the namespaces, the methods available to you can actually solve this problem a lot easier. We don't need the loops, we don't need all this stuff because it's done for us, it's readily available. And if you don't know about this, then you can Google it, you can check the documentation. But this is how you improve as a C# programmer. It's just the ability and the knowledge, not of actually doing it, but know what is already there available, what is in your toolbox, what you can utilize. So we've condensed all of that down into one line of code. So that's pretty cool, isn't it? So I guess the takeaway, knowledge is power, but not necessarily how to do it, but knowing what is available to you. So this is the palindrome problem in C#. I hope you learned something new, not about how to tackle the problem, but also how to approach it and devise a few different solutions for it as well. So I'm Sean, thank you for watching.